So welcome to the next session today. Hopefully you've got your cuppa, done a quick blue run, and we're all set to go for another great session. I would like to welcome Brett into our Zoom meeting today. And Brett is going to bring with us some great ideas, I'm sure, about his passion for working with families. Let me just introduce a little bit to you about Brett. Brett was a former critical care nurse for 15 years, a children's pastor and a school chaplain for 12 years. And for the past 7 years, he's been the CEO of Focus on the Family Australia. He's been married for 30 years, I assume, to his one and only beautiful wife, has 3 young adult sons, one who's married, one soon to be, and a very, very proud grandfather of a 7-month-old grandson, Judah. So Brett, over to you, and thank you again for all the work you put into this presentation. We look forward to it.
Thank you so very much, and welcome everyone. I can imagine that many of your learning styles is not used to being in front of a screen, and I would put up my hand. I like interacting with people and engaging with people, so we'll try and make this as engaging as possible. And obviously there'll be some people who would love to keep on chatting because of those learning styles, but we want to be able to hear from you and engage with you as much as possible. I'll just put on my share screen so you don't have to actually see me the whole time, but I will actually from time to time break out into different things. So you can see that Intergenerate Australia. Can you see the screen there all right, everyone? Okay, excellent. Well, one of the things that we want to talk to you about is how the family works. And this is one of those areas that many families make it very difficult, but the passion of Focus on the Family is to make Christ known as we strengthen relationships in Australian families. And obviously I'm in the radio studio at the moment. That's what many people know us through the radio stations, and we're in about 750 radio stations across Australia, and we have a reach of, it's been calculated, about 4.5 million. So every now and then you get people coming up to you and say, I heard you, and or you said something at the right time for me. But that's most encouraging, and you're never too sure who might be hearing. I remember a story of a man come up to me and says, you saved my marriage. And I said, well, tell me more. And he says, well, I was leaving my wife. I had my bags packed. I was hopping in the car, and you came on the radio saying that marriage is worth fighting for, and it's going to be hard work, but it's worth fighting for. And he was so convicted by this little 1 minute that I shared that he got out of his car, grabbed his bag, went back to his wife and said, we're going to sort this out. And after 12 months of intense counseling, they renewed their wedding vows, and now he's actually, 2 years later, he's actually a Christian counselor himself. So it does work. The power of radio is very, very, very powerful. And I don't know if you hear us on the radio, but we actually have our Facebook sites. We've got our YouTube channel, and you can sign up for a weekly tip that we can get into your inbox. A lot of the things we do only last a minute because people's attention span is only a minute long, but we love doing what we do. And one of the things that we find that is the most exciting that we've been doing is we've actually started like a platform, like a Netflix channel, and it's got a host of different resources. And if you like things for free, and many people like things for free, we've actually got a whole thing called Talking About Early Parenting. It's we teamed up with MOPS of Australia and Mainly Music of Australia, and so that's available on a platform. And for those who are married or thinking about it, just one little infomercial that we're actually hosting for our second time due to popular demand, a online marriage conference that starts in a couple of weeks' time. So if you'd like to find out more details, you can go to our website, but I'll talk about that as we go along. So we're going to be helping people understand the power of their family story for faith formation. And I can imagine that you could share some of your own stories, and there will be opportunities. We'll have some breakout opportunities throughout the day or this session, and hopefully that you'll be able to share your story, to know that your story is unique to you, but you may be of a great encouragement to other people. But let me just pray, and then we'll get started. Father, I thank you so much for this opportunity. I thank you for the people who are tuning in, either live or watching this retrospectively. I pray that it'll be an encouragement as we work and think and act, and all intergenerationally in our communities, wherever we may be. And I pray, Father, that the words that I share may be of encouragement, may be of a conviction, may be of an empowerment to be able to be thinking more family orientated when it comes to intergenerational ministry. I thank you for this opportunity in Jesus' name. Amen. One of the things that I would like to share is this is my grandfather. And my grandfather was a very sincere man, and he had always grown up as in the Church of Christ. And but he always did this. Every time we had grace, he'd always look very, very sincere. He'd put his fingers across his forehead and says, "For what we're about to receive, may Lord make me truly thankful for Christ's sake. Amen." And that was it. That was as much spiritual input that I ever got from my grandfather, his grace. And they went to church, but it was never relational. And my father went to this same church and met my mother. And this is my father. And he had an encounter with God, and it turned out that his encounter with God didn't correlate at the time with the Church of Christ ethos, and he had to go to another area. But my father was a scientist, and he was a man who actually studied everything to the nth degree, including theology. And so my upbringing was seeing my father study the Bible 3 to 4 hours a night. And during my early years, he never neglected us, but often we would see him countless hours just studying the Bible and studying and writing, and he wrote a number of books himself. And I actually thought, if this is what faith is all about, it's not for me. I can't keep up with this. I don't know how that would work. He is not. It's not compatible with my type of learning style, and there's no way I can give 3 to 4 hours of time. But he was very sincere. But it wasn't until I realized that it was my own faith journey. But he never questioned me. He never challenged me in the sense of I had to do exactly the same. But it was something that I was very mindful of. And this is my mother, and she was a very sincere woman, and she's still alive. My father passed away about 12 years. And this is my wife's parents, and they've had their own journey. My mother-in-law is still alive, and she is a most gracious and sincere woman. But that's a little bit about my story, and I don't know about your story, but all of this comes around as about what many people have come through, and all the data would say, hey, a lot of people have been brought up in church and continue with their faith. And I'm going to share some data and statistics, and but then I'm going to give you some things that maybe seem very obvious, but by the end of it, it might challenge you in your communities, wherever they may be, about how you can do faith formation through the family. And it's not through programs, and it's not through the right resources. It's actually just empowering the right people at the right time. So I thought, just for the start, just for a few, maybe 5 minutes, is actually to find out what is your faith history. And whoever is co-hosting will be able to break into a few, just for 5 minutes. I'd like for you to just give, whoever your cohort is, just to give a brief history of your faith journey, and whether some of you are prodigals who left and came back, or whether you came to faith later on in life, which are more rare, but they seem to be still occurring. So just 5 minutes, and we'll get back to you in a few minutes' time. Well, welcome back. Hopefully that was encouraging. I was speaking with a group. I dropped into there and hearing their rebellious stories, and also the journey that it was someone else inviting them along to church, and then they met their love, and then they got connected and have never looked back. But we all have different stories of our faith journey, and some of them people have had that family dynamic where they've been brought up in a loving, caring environment. But you might be surprised that they aren't necessarily the keys, in the sense of being brought up in a church or being brought up in a Christian home is the only thing. It has a factor, but it's not the only thing. All throughout the scriptures, it starts talking about how we need to look at the Bible as our source of encouragement and our direction. And it says in Psalm, and this is the psalmist and probably David writing this, and he was actually encouraging his people and to remember the stories. My people hear my teaching, listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things things from you, things that we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from our descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. And it's those stories that go from generation to generation, which unfortunately in mainstream churches has not done as well. But we do see that there's some denominations that are actually going from strength to strength, and they're actually continuing that. And I'd have to say the one that does this probably the best of all the denominations would be the Jewish culture. They do so well with passing on the stories, their heritage, their history, and remember things. And it's such an important part. And it's not uncommon that the families stay together. They do everything together, and their faith journey is together. And the percentage would be the highest out of all the denominations. We could talk about Muslims and Hindus and other denominations, but in the mainstream Christian faith, we've actually seen a little bit of a decline. And but I'm going to give you some data in a moment. But one of the things about passing on the faith is that a lot of data would actually say there's a huge falling out, and that would be true. But the research that actually has shown that the transmission of faith has remained remarkably the same. One of the things that has become quite evident is in the area that from the 1970s, about 7 out of 10 would remain in the tradition of their parents. And then fast forward to the 2005, which is one data set, it was only 6 out of 10. So there wasn't this dramatic decline that everyone talks about. But there is a but. And I'll talk about that from the 2005 to 2015, we have seen a significant decline. But from the 1970s to 2005, we haven't seen as much. And one of the things that we're actually seeing is that many people who do leave their faith actually return, because there's something about their heritage. There's something about their family of origin. There's something about the way that they were brought up has actually made them want to go, you know what, I may have drifted away, the prodigals, and then I've been drawn back. But one of the things that has been quite evident, and it doesn't matter how parents practice their faith or how fervent they are in attendance or how fervent they are in serving, it's actually the key to a passing on the faith is the relationship or the closeness between children and their parents. And if we go back to another question, in breakout sessions in a few moments, I would love for you to talk about your relationship, especially for those who are brought up in a Christian environment and a traditional faith-orientated journey. How much has that continued? How much was it factored that your relationship or the closeness that you had with your parents? And another big factor that we've seen on passing on faith is allowing the chance to question. I remember saying to my dad, I don't think I get it. I don't get it. And he said, I want you to look it up for yourself. And I thought, oh, that's all right. Yeah, I can do that. And then fast forward to my son, who'd been brought up in a Christian environment, being brought up at a Christian school. He was the son of the children's pastor. And at the age of about 15, 16, he came up to me and said, Dad, I don't get it. I don't understand the Bible. I don't really necessarily believe in God. And I could have actually reacted in a way saying, how can you do this? How can you question it? You've been brought up. I could have reacted that way, but instead I actually said, oh, that's okay. Why don't we explore it together? And I introduced him to the Case for Christ. I introduced him to Ravi Zacharias. I introduced him to other apologetics. And then from there, he went from strength to strength. And now he puts me to shame with his faith, because I didn't shy away from his doubts. I didn't shy away from his questioning. They have to work out their own faith journey and have their own identity in their own faith. And I'm wondering whether, if you were brought up in your family, were you able to question? Were you able to put your hand up and say, I wasn't allowed to question? It had to be. And I've read some reports that if any time a child question their faith, the parents would shun them away or would ignore them or actually not even allow for any dialogue whatsoever. And that actually resulted in them leaving the faith altogether. So giving you a little bit of a snapshot of about 90 years or so, religion in Australia, and this is by some data from the ABS, in 2011, about 38% would identify with themselves being Anglican. In 2016, it's only 13%. Catholics have remained relatively the same, which is quite an interesting journey. The Methodists, the Presbyterian, the Reform, the Uniting, they're gone from 26% down to 6%. In total, in the early of 19th century, or the 20th century, that about 90, almost 100% of people would identify with some sort of Christian heritage. But fast forward, it's gone down to about half of that. And one thing that we've seen, a growing thing, and you'll hear this, is called the nuns. In 2011, only a very, very small percentage would consider themselves to have no religion whatsoever. But now we're seeing that growing, and now with multiculturalism, very few other religions, and now we're seeing a large number of different religions. And reading a book that I would highly recommend and encourage you. It's got some great data in here, but there was just a couple of statements that I thought be worth just mentioning. It says what was the most intriguing was the author of this was that the parental piety, their reverence for Christ, their reverence for the Bible, their reverence for the service doesn't make up for a distant dad. And I thought, gee, that is so profound. About if you hear a lot of data, and I'll interested to see whether I'll get a show of hands, and I'll go back to that in just a few moments. But one of the things is, a lot of times dads seem a major factor in their upbringing, and it kept on going on, and it said fathers might matter more. It was a conjecture between do mums matter or fathers matter more, and one was saying it's an oversimplification. What we might be looking at is where just mums alone or fathers alone isn't successful. The most likely scenario where faith gets passed along is when mums and dads are participating together. And just that alone, we could unpack for a long time. But one of the things that said, parents need to build scaffolding around their kids. Structure and guidance, but not keep them in a bubble. They don't need to be over controlled, but they don't need to be under supported. So that alone, I would like to just go into maybe we'll just allow just comments along the section. So on the chat section, maybe go to that question about, did you have, for those who have got a strong faith, bringing up in a strong faith, what was your relationship with your parents like? Was it close? Was it not close? And I would also be interested to see, were you allowed to question faith? Were you allowed to question? So just open up, just write some comments about there, and we'll see how we go. Some feel well and truly supported. They could question. I love it when they're allowed to ask hard questions. Mother was warm. Father was a great Bible teacher, so they were doing it together, which is great. Someone was saying that they weren't allowed to discuss faith, which is a very interesting journey. And it's great that you have continued with your faith there. Close relationship. My parents were new to the faith, so we were learnt together, which is great, doing life together. A single parent mother, very supportive, very close. Many single parent families are very close. This is great. Close with parents, never pushed to believe, and that was always able to question. That's if parents could get that, because I get a lot of people contacting me and saying, my child's leaving the faith. My child is not wanting to come to church. What should I do? What should I do? And it's this tension between dragging them along, or do you encourage them and they have to come to their own conclusion. But I heard this wonderful analogy is that you don't have to drag a kid if you were visiting a chocolate factory. They would go to the chocolate factory. You wouldn't have to encourage, you just have to say, we're going to the chocolate factory. They go, yeah. What if you are in the situation where you're dragging your kids, what are you dragging them to? And that is what we're talking about, this intergenerational aspect. What are you dragging them to? Are you able to get them so it's relevant? Is it engaging? Is it relevant to their world? Is it fun? Is it and all of that is we don't want to just drag them. We want them to go to it and they want to be connected. And many people have been brought up with the idea that they have to go to that church, the church they've been brought up with. And a guy by the name of Andy Stanley got into a bit of controversy a number of years ago. And he runs a mega church in Atlanta, Georgia. And he actually was speaking at a conference, and he actually said, if you go to a church and it's less than 100 people, you're doing your kids a disservice. And what he was actually saying wasn't meant to be harsh. He was actually saying, do your kids have peers? Do your kids have things that they could tap into that are relevant for them? And I thought it was so powerful. He could have worded it a bit differently. And knowing that most churches, about 95% of churches are under 100. He was talking to a large audience that most of them had larger churches, but at the same time, what are you dragging them to? Is it something that they feel like they can be connected? And we'll talk about that as we go along. But I love the more, someone said a bit too much of a reveal, but early dysfunction, but most of the childhood, both parents sharing faith and relationships up and down, but relationship with dad, always consistent. Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm going to go back to the share screen now, and thank you very much for your participation. And but what I'd like to keep on talking about is, and maybe this speaking to the choir here, but I thought it's just a recap, and many of the things you've been sharing over the last day and a half so far about the benefits of being intergenerational. And it affirms people's values and in the community. It supports their concerns or activities, their interests. It teaches us to care for one another. And for those who want these PowerPoint, I'll be more than happy to post them so you can have them later on. And you can look at them and I'll send the notes. But this is, as I said, preaching to the choir. But we can see that role modeling, and I think some people made some comments about the importance of mentors and speaking to their lives. So true. The need for mature adults speaking into our lives, looking at everyone's strengths, giftings, and talents, and allows us to pass on our foundations of faith and family to the next generation. All of these be very straightforward, but we also know there's a lot of challenges. We see a growing need or a trend of individualism. It's all about me. We see a much more mobile generation. Many years ago, it used to be people would stay in the same suburb, but now we let a lot of people move, and as a result of that moving, they don't have their grandparents close by, and that's a sad loss. But technology has enabled us to connect, but we've also seen that technology is resulting in many people drifting away from, that they're so keen to look at screens that even live and engaging content, it doesn't gravitate or doesn't make people want to stay there. And we see age segregation in lots of areas of society, but even in the church, we see that happens time and time again. We got the preschoolers, and I was a kids pastor. We had a large church, and we were ministering to about 1,000 children every weekend. But for sheer practical side of things, the rooms, we didn't have enough room size to fit everyone in. So we had to have the 1 to 2 year olds, the 2 to 3 year olds, the 3 to 4s, and the 5s to 6s, and break them up. But if I had my way, you'd like to have them, the younger and the older together, then they could learn together. And but we can't always do that depending on the practicalities of it. But the church can be an exception, but we also seem to learning groups, children, youth, young adults, young marrieds, and then we actually see that this stops later on. We do have small groups, but often it's become the young families, and they become older families, and then the children are neglected and they're sent to another area and not doing things together. And again, I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about this intergenerational aspect, but it's amazing if we have to stop and think and be more intentional about how we are breaking things up in intergenerational and how we do that in family life as well. And but I'm going to go back to a show of hands, and you can, just put this into your memory banks here, about what do you think, and maybe we can see it from people's hands, or I think you could do thumbs up or what have you, about what do you think is more influential? And I just got a few points here. Do you think church attendance is important? You can put your hand up or thumbs up or something like that. Is church attendance for it? It is a factor, most definitely. What about a Christian home? Is that a factor? Is that the most influential? Maybe, but there's all different types of Christian homes. I've met people who have been brought up in a Christian home where it's very autocratic, very authoritarian. People don't feel safe. And I've even had people who are saying that they were actually beaten with a Bible. And that is not a loving, and they would say they're a Christian home, but they're not necessarily going to have an upbringing where that is normal. And I've actually spoken to another friend of mine whose father was quite abusive and was quite verbally aggressive and at times physically aggressive, but then he would go out in the mission field. And there was this hypocritical aspect of his upbringing that, he was actually has now drifted away from his faith as a result of that. Then we actually see, is the mother or the father more important? And there's a lot of data that actually says that fathers are more influential over their children. And I've actually spoken about this, but when you look at the data, you don't always get the bigger picture, but mothers tend to be the ones that control the family. They are the ones that more likely get kids to go to church, more likely to pray with their children, more likely to get them to read their Bible. But fathers or mothers together is the key. It's doing them together is probably the best way of looking at it. The liturgy of the churches and what have you, piety, which I mentioned before, serving together, this is a big factor. Living out your faith is a really big factor. Bible reading and prayer, that is a significant one when it comes to, I remember that I saw my dad read the Bible all the time. But then when I was growing, when I had children myself, I would do my devotions early in the morning or late at night. And then I realized my boys don't get to see me role modeling my Bible reading or my prayer life. And then I had to make just an intentional decision to role model that so they got to see it, not just talk about it, but actually see it. And grandparents, I've actually shared my grandparents' story, but there's so much value with grandparents being involved. And in fact, I will provide a link to a podcast or a video YouTube link on the power of grandparents when it comes to bringing up faith. And then one thing that it's drifted away a little bit away from the family aspect to it, but one of the ones that are very relevant and pertinent to mention, that for young people to become what we call resilient Christians, there was a lot of research done on this, and it actually says an outside person, not mum and dad, not grandparents, but an outside person knowing your name in a church community was one of the most powerful things to get people over their hump, especially through the teenage years, that there's an outside person. And so I just make a mental note of that, and I might come back to that a little bit later on. And so there's many different ways of approaches. We can do interest groups rather than age groups. So, you've got a 6-year-old who loves cars, get in with the men who love cars. You've got a woman who, a young girl who loves doing crafts. Get her involved with other older people. It's not just age groups. We should do interest groups. The mentoring, I cannot talk about enough. If I had my way, if I was starting a church, I would actually have mentors. I would have mentors in marriage, mentors in parenting, mentors in individuals. We need to do this so much more in the church. We need to hear the different stories of different ages, and I think you've been doing some plenary discussions, but I would actually have the different ages and stages, especially in your faith communities, to hear one another from a young person's point of view and from a mature age point of view. And we need to actually have not only the mature people speaking to our lives, but also the younger people speaking into the older lives. And I've been to one church that actually had a partnership that all the teens actually had a mentor, and they had to the seniors. And it turned out that all the young people would go over and help them with their technology and help them with practical things around. And it just works seamlessly when older people and younger people are working together. And then we actually see doing activities, missions, dinners. I'm part of a church community at the moment where the seniors hosted a dinner by the young adults, and they're given a 5-course meal. They all have to come together all dressed up. But what was really good was that the young people actually sat with their in the tables. After they served them, they actually sat and talked. And then it was reversed, that the seniors put on something for the young adults. And it was just a beautiful way of interacting with one another. And then we actually see the roles and specific and doing events and worship together. All of these things are very important. So different approaches to intergenerational, but making sure that one size does not fit all. It needs to be personal and relational. So what I'd like to do now is fast forward that area from 2005 to 2016. And many of you would know about George Barna. He's an amazing researcher. And he was actually made the comment that research has shown that today's 20-somethings were churchgoers in their teen years, 61% are now disengaged spiritually. 61%. That is a significant part, and it's mind-blowing to think that where has everyone gone? Why have they become disengaged? Why has this occurred? And I don't know about you, but I would like to address this, and I'm sure most of you would. And in this book, I'm going to just share some highlights that this is where I think will help you formulate not a program, but in a culture, in your wherever you have influence, about what you're doing in your community, what you're doing in your in either in your church, or if you're in a home group or in your denomination. What are you doing? But this book, and I'd highly recommend, just going back to that, the title of the book is Parenting Revolutionary, or Revolutionary Parenting. Fantastic book. Got a great lot of detail in it, but here are some highlights. And one of them says, churches alone do not and cannot have as much influence on children. And I thought, well, that's a kick to the gut. Being a former kids pastor, I thought, man, I'm doing everything I can. But as I was more and more involved, and I'm sure there's many more people who are in that children's ministry space, and they're thinking they're doing everything they can to do stuff for their kids. And during COVID-19, we've actually seen more digital creative ways of presenting things. But the next point will make it a much more clearer. It says the greatest influence a church may have is impacting parents. That is something that if we could just park there for a little bit longer, but we will at the end. I'll get you to talk about it with your small groups and your cohorts about how much the church or your community or wherever you're influenced, how much are you impacting parents to be the greatest influences of their children. The impact, this is talking about how to create, disciples, lifetime disciples of faith. The impact is proportional to the depth of relationship. So if parents are distant, the likelihood of them transferring their faith is lessened. But when the relationship is strong, when it's tight, when it's actually of depth, and when you can interact and have dialogues, not monologues, that is going to help improve the health and well-being of the relationship. And the amount of times devoted, this is the hands-on aspect, and in our fast-paced world, many parents will say, I wish I had more time, but I'm working, I've got other responsibilities, I've got to serve in my local church, I'm volunteering, I'm doing all these things. And often the first group of people that are neglected are children. And we have to understand the most powerful influence that a mother and a father can have on their children is their time. It's not just quality time, it's quantity time. And I could talk about that for a lot longer, but we need to be much more hands-on and encourage them. And the church calendar, and I have to say, can get so busy that we actually are making them to make a choice. Do I go to the church activity or do I spend time at home? Have a look at your calendars would be a very big first place to start of how much you are allowing in your world. And one of the interesting things that came in the study was that it doesn't matter about their financial background, doesn't matter about their educational status. It has no correlation on spiritual development. In fact, in lower socioeconomic areas, faith is thriving. It's when it's a much more rich environment, more affluent. There is a decline in people going to church. One of the things that was interesting is parents not conforming to the patterns of this world. That verse in Philippians, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but renew their minds. Romans 12. One of the things that they're not conventional, they have to have that one is our family is different, not following everyone else's patterns. And if they communicate the why their family is different and not following the conventional approach, they're more likely to be able to pass on their faith, but they have to explain the why. And a lot of the times it can be, because I said so, doesn't work and doesn't cut it for this generation. Another thing that we have to be very mindful of is that families that actually communicate biblical worldviews and able to engage faith, and that's where Deuteronomy chapter 6 comes in. When you're waking up in the morning, when you're walking along the road, when you're driving them along to soccer, that's the fast forward 21st century Brett Ryan version, when you're driving them to music or lessons to whatever it may be, can you intertwine a faith conversation? And it's not meant to be preaching to them, it's just including God in your everyday life. And I'm wondering where you have an influence, whether you are actually encouraging parents and grandparents and caregivers to actually incorporate a biblical worldview into the conversation. And so here we have got, we can give information, but we actually want transformation. We want to be able to see it happening at multiple levels. Obviously, from the pulpit is one area, small groups is another area. Website, quite often websites have really traditionally of just transferring information. Here's the information, here's the next event. But are you providing the right resources to empower parents, grandparents, and guardians to have these faith conversations? I don't know about you, but I want to be able to have these faith conversations. And so what I'd like you to talk about, and we're going to go into our breakout into another area, is I see from all the research that I've been doing, and obviously I might be completely biased because I work for Focus on the Family, and we're all about strengthening families and we're all about strengthening relationships. But it would seem that when mum and dad are doing well in their marriage, it has a flow-on effect on the kids. And when that is in a positive state, they're more likely to be able to pass on their faith and more likely to be able to have kids that not only see mum and dad living out their faith and being able to witness from the coalface that faith does work. Are you doing things in the marriage space, and are you doing things in the parenting space in your faith communities? And are you able to equip them or empower them to have the God conversations? But it's not preaching, it's actually just incorporating the conversations. And many communities would benefit from having kids who may be coming to faith later on in their teen years, haven't had a family heritage of faith, haven't had a family heritage of role modeling in their families, of having God conversations. That's when we need more surrogate mentors and parents and grandparents speaking into the lives of young people. So I'm going to just stop right there for a few moments, and I would love for you just to have a conversation in your small groups. Go into your small groups and just say, what is your faith community doing in the area of marriage? Are you strengthening marriages? Because when marriages are strong, it's more likely to be able to be far healthier environment for faith to be passed on. Are you equipping and empowering parents to do that well? Because a lot of people just go into this space and go, it'll be all right. And I unfortunately get to hear probably a higher percentage of people who have not had a very functional upbringing. They've had dysfunction in their relationships, dysfunction in their families, and then they get married and it perpetuates. And their kids are going to be witnessing this. And so I would love for you just to talk about how we can pass on faith, and it really stems not on programs. It doesn't stem on having the perfect activities and that the church or the faith community can do. A lot of it, all the research comes down to is mum and dad doing it well together, and are they doing it together in their parenting? So break into small groups, and we'll come back in about 7 minutes time. Well, welcome back, everyone, and I hope that was a great discussion, maybe challenging. Some people were, the conversations were of the group that I was with. I had a Deb and a Deborah and a Wendy, and sharing theirs along with their stories, and even their history gave an impression of how vitally important this is, because there are no guarantees. There are definitely no guarantees of being brought up in a Christian home. The depth of relationship, the genuineness of living out your faith. And it's not necessarily being tick the box. I read the Bible. I've prayed. Tick. It's just a lifestyle. It's living this out in a really genuine way, and allowing us to have God conversations, and allowing our kids to question and be curious, because they're more likely to own their own faith. And that's how we have a faith that actually can go pass on from generation to generation. And we want that. We want to be able to pass it on and tell those stories. And I think wherever you may have influence, maybe you have to look at ways and strategies of improving how mum and dad are doing in their relationship, their marriage relationship, how they are being more equipped to, we might think parenting should come naturally. It is not. And many parents are struggling. And many people are in dysfunctional families, and they're just going to perpetuate this unless, and I think the church should have the most healthy of marriages, the most healthy of parenting, the most engaged, the most intentional, the better informed. And if we can do that, the church can have a significant say, because we're actually seeing, unfortunately, that the divorce rate is becoming equal to that of the world. We're seeing single parent families happening on a more too frequent journey, and it shouldn't be. But we know that happens. But we also know that if God is the center of everything, if God is central to the marriage, if God is central to the family, if God is central in every aspect of our thinking, our actions, and our words, then there's a greater chance for them to pass on that faith, and it will go on from generation to generation to generation. I hope that what I've been able to share with you has been helpful. If we can be of any service to you whatsoever, I'll just give my email address. It's ryanb@families.org.au. If you can't remember that, you can also remember response@families.org.au. Our website has a treasure trove of different resources. If we at Focus on the Family Australia can be of any service to your faith community, do not hesitate to contact us. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Just a reminder that we're actually hosting a marriage conference online starting on the 7th of July. And every Thursday night during the COVID-19, I've been hosting a Facebook Live event on a variety of topics. And on tomorrow evening, I know you've probably been all digitally out and you don't want to see another screen for any length of time, but we're all talking about resilience. I've got Sharon Witt, who runs a resilience conference, and we're going to be talking about resilience. So if we can be of any service to you, don't hesitate to contact us. And thank you so much for joining us. And may God bless you in your area of influence as you continue to create an intergenerational ministry wherever you are. God bless.
Thank you.